Hello and welcome to episode 183 of the Chills of Will podcast. Pleasure today to be here with Eli Cranor. And here's a little bit about Eli. Edgar-Award-winning author Eli Cranor lives and writes from the banks of Lake Dardanelle, a reservoir of the Arkansas River, nestled in the heart of true grit country. His critically acclaimed debut novel, Don't Know Tough, won the Peter Lovesey First Crime Novel Contest and was named one of the best books of the year by USA Today and one of the best crime novels of 2022 by the New York Times. Eli also pens a weekly column called Where I'm Writing From for the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, and his craft column, Shop Talk, appears monthly at CrimeReads. Eli's newest novel, Ozark Dogs, which will be the thrust of our conversation today, is now available wherever books are sold. Hello, Edgar Award-winning author. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me, Peter.
Probably don't get tired of hearing that, right?
No, and I was just thinking, I think this might be the first interview, podcast I've
Oh,
done since there. So yeah, it's sounds good.
Oh man, it's a pleasure to have you on. You were talking a little bit before we were recording about like you're still, with winning the awards and stuff. And the books came out pretty close together, right? With Don't Know Tough. Like, what's it
Yeah.
been like with, you know, winning awards and really talking about that book, and then you have this new one that's also just dynamite. Like, what's that like? Kind of living with the new book, living with the old book, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's been, you try not to what's that old saying? You can't pick a favorite child.
Hmm.
Uh, I think it's the same with books. And so you try not to compare them. You
Yeah.
try not to
Yeah.
look back and say like, okay, well, what did this book do in its first month, and what is this book doing
Uh,
in its first month? Like you try not to do that stuff, but it's kind of hard at the same time. And yeah, they did come out about almost exactly a year apart,
wow.
which is pretty quick, and especially for like with the debut.
Hmm.
Debuts are just different, and that's another reason why it's not always best to compare,
Hmm.
because debuts they get different sorts of things. You're this guy they pulled out of a hole in Arkansas and thrust into the spotlight with the debut, and that's interesting and shiny.
Sure.
But the interesting thing about these two books is they were both written, like the first draft of Don't Know Tough was finished in like 2016,
Okay.
and then Ozark Dogs was finished in like 2017. So
Ah,
they've both been alive for a long time, and that
yeah.
was how they were able to come out like they did, and they kind of work together. They work in the same world. Not a sequel by any means, but there's
Uh-huh.
a couple of Easter eggs, that tie the
Ah,
places together.
okay.
But yeah, it's been. I mentioned that to you before we got going, that I've done, a few things with Ozark Dogs, but as soon as Don't Know Tough won the Edgar, that's what everybody wanted to go back and talk about. So I'm excited to talk about Ozark Dogs.
You're like that, you're like, I don't know, Aerosmith or something like that. And like I was like, play Sweet Emotions. Like, no, we got a new album out, you
Yeah,
gotta listen
yeah,
to
that's
that.
right.
And this
That's
is a
right.
heck of a there is no sophomore slump here, man. It's just incredible read. I'm looking forward to talking to you about it. Fellow athlete, I definitely, played hoops in my day. I don't think I had nowhere even close to the success maybe you did as a quarterback. But the idea of being an athlete, I know Don't Know Tough has a lot to do with football. What I wonder how reading and athletics were parts of your life, if they were complementary or not, growing up.
Yeah, man, for sure. So I attribute me becoming a novelist to the fact that I was so much of a jock by like fourth grade. My
Hmm.
parents were both public school teachers.
Okay.
Um, and so I was becoming so much of this like sports kid that my dad, the fourth grade of like the summer of my like going into fifth grade, he enforced this new rule that I was going to have to read 20 pages of any book that I wanted each day in the summer, and then I was going to have to write a page in a journal. So I didn't have to like write about the book, but I had to like write, anything I wanted. And most of those journals started with "This is the worst day ever. I hate writing." But
You learned hyperbole, right?
yeah, and what that did for me was it it made me good. It made me a good reader and a good writer because at an early age, while other kids were just throwing a football or shooting a basketball, I was having to at least, commit an hour a day to it, like this, building this routine. And
Mm,
so by the time I got to high school, I was in English class, and I was one of the strongest readers and one of the strongest writers, just because my dad had like kind of forced it on me. And it's just like sports, if you're naturally taller and naturally have good hand-eye coordination, you're probably gonna like basketball. Like
mhm.
you're good at it, so you're probably gonna like it.
Sure.
And so I was always a good English student. And so it led to this kind of strange double life where, I became like a college quarterback, but I was also an English literature major.
Mm,
And so I was always this weird combination of like bookworm slash jock. And
yeah.
I give all credit to my pops.
That's cool. What were some of those books that you might have denied it at first? What were some of those books that you were like, man, this is pretty dang good?
Man, so what I really remember getting hooked on were those permabound, like abridged classics.
Mm,
So if you remember those, they had like a picture in every chapter, and it was like
yes.
Moby Dick and Frankenstein
Okay.
and, all of those classic works, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I was reading them, in like middle school and like telling people like I've read Moby Dick, like, and I could follow the plot along enough, to sound educated. And I remember really liking that, like liking feeling like I was well read. Ray Bradbury was another huge
Hmm.
influence early on. And then the magic of Bradbury is that you can read them as a middle school or junior high student, and then you can go back and read them, however many years later in my
Yeah.
mid 50s, and read them. He was writing in the 50s, and like now we're 75 years into the future, and it's still just as powerful. And then on the cheaper side, I guess cheaper, I don't know, but I loved Goosebumps. Like Goosebumps
Of
were
course. Of
huge,
course.
growing up. Arkansas, I guess Missouri, but like where the red fern grows was really big
Mm-hmm.
too.
Ooh, that one made you feel things, right?
Yeah, I think you could trace some Ozark dog stuff, back to where the red fern grows.
Huh. Yeah, I meant to bring it up yesterday. I was talking to Talia Kaluri, who's written about all the stories have animals as narrators.
Ah,
What we fed to the Manticore, and I wanted to bring up because someone remind me of the you talking about Ray Bradbury, the soft rains will come.
there will come
There
soft
will
rain.
come soft rains with that poem inside the story, right?
Yeah,
Like based on the poem. But
the
I was thinking of
automated
that.
automated house.
The automated house, right? I was just thinking about that in relation to one of her stories. I met Ray Bradbury, and he's in his wheelchair. This is probably 2009, 2010. I think right before he passed. Yeah, just mad respect. I can't say that's necessarily my favorite genre, but like you said, I mean, just amazing, right?
Yeah, man. And Dandelion Wine is
Mm,
another one that I've returned to. There's a story in there called The Happiness Machine
okay.
that is just absolutely heart-wrenching and timeless. But yeah, Bradbury from an early age, and then a guy that I just returned to again and again.
The story you mentioned, that's not the one that became the ice cream suit or something like that. Do you know what I'm talking
Well, the happiness machine is where this guy in kind of just this hick town, like he goes into his garage and he builds this thing that like
about? Okay.
they go and they sit down and it like can show you like New York and it can show you Paris and it can show
Mm,
and it makes everybody in this hick town so sad because they've never seen it before. And so
okay.
it, like
Okay.
catches fire and burns up, And the closing scene is he's like cleaning up the mess and he like looks through his window and there's his wife and his kids like putting dinner on the table, and it's this really beautiful like
Ooh.
metaphor for, the same old thing, but it's
Uh,
just done so well.
yeah. Oh
Yeah.
shoot, man, awesome. Do you I mean, well, I guess do you consider yourself a Southern writer? And then if so, or if not, I mean, did you like who were you reading from the South, or was that not a concern? Was that like, hey, I'm gonna seek out some of these Southern writers, or was that not necessarily a concern of yours?
Yeah, definitely. I would consider myself, uh, I cut my teeth on Southern writers. So,
Mm.
before crime or any of that stuff came into my palette, I was reading like Faulkner, Flannery O'Connor, of course, like the big greats, the big classics. But then there were guys like Larry Brown. So Larry Brown was a Mississippi writer who was a fireman, not college educated, just really took this workman-like approach, wrote real clean, simple prose. And
Hmm.
he had a documentary called The Rough South of Larry Brown that I found when I was in college and really thinking I wanted to start writing seriously. And he just laid it out, man. He just talked about, how, writing is no different than laying bricks, that the more bricks you lay, the cleaner those rows get. And the same is true of writing sentences. The more sentences you write, the cleaner they get. And back to Bradbury has this great quote, says, "You're not a real writer till you've written a million words." And so like when I first got into writing, I'd just gotten out of coaching football. And so like my old football coaching mindset, like I broke out, like a moleskin journal and started keeping up with words, to like try and hit a billion. But yeah, man. So beyond that, Larry Brown, Harry Crews, Jesmond Ward. Jesmond Ward had a huge impact on Don't Know Tough.
Mm.
What she does with voice in her novels was just something that I had loved and rang so true
Yeah.
to me. So yeah, to answer your question, like that was where it all was. I had a great professor named Johnny Wink, who he was related at one point to a guy named Jack Butler. And Jack Butler wrote this great Mississippi novel called Jiu-Jitsu for Christ.
Hmm.
And he also wrote Living in Little Rock with Miss Little Rock, which was like nominated for the Pulitzer back in like the 80s or early 90s. And so I got hooked up with Jack through Johnny in my college days. So I had this guy who I was mailing stories at that point, like hard copy. He'd mail them back. So I cut my teeth on all of that. And that's really what I was trying to write for like the early years. I mean, it took me about 6 years to get for Don't Know Tough to find its way into the door. And
Hmm.
I didn't really ever consider myself like a crime writer until Don't Know Tough won the first crime novel contest, and then which was great because it opened up this door of all this genre stuff that was getting to read with beginner's eyes, and getting to see like, oh, okay, this is how this stuff works, this is something, and I've really leaned into that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. So, Southern writer or not, you talk about that. And how about, I mean, crime writer or not? How does that? I mean, does that inform the way you write? And then just good writing is good writing, great writing is great writing. But what is it maybe that would distinguish you or mark you as a crime writer or a writer of crime?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I've really enjoyed exploring the genre and like the greats. And the best that I've found in crime writing is a guy by the name of Elmore Leonard.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, man, I've read all 42 of Dutch's novels, all the way back to the westerns. And I would put his line by line writing up against anything. I mean, Dutch had stories that were in the New Yorker. We know like the big successes that he had with like Justified, which was really just inspired by a short story.
Hmm.
Um, but I think what crime writing does for me is I was always, I mean, if you can tell by reading, my stuff, like I don't mind to go big and to go weird and to go in places,
Yeah.
but a crime novel it almost it puts up like the genre in and of itself imposes these guardrails, that keep your story going.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I think that I've really liked that. I know I've really liked that because I don't mind writing. I write a lot. I'm a fast writer. And I wasted a lot of time kind of waffling, with stuff that never would really pan out. And
Hmm.
so the crime genre has really opened that door. Another thing is I told you I teach virtually now. So I
Hmm.
teach English 11 and 12 to kids that are in juvenile correctional facilities all across Arkansas. And the thing I like about crime is, being around those kids. And before that, I taught for 5 years in the ALE. school, which, is like at-risk kids or kids, who have any sort of, like, it could be mental problems, behavioral problems, so a girl who just might have got pregnant and missed a lot of class.
Mm,
Um, and crime allows you to really get into like some social topics, some stuff around like people who are committing crimes. And that's one thing, like, I've just been teaching these kids in juvie, for a year, but Lord, the thing they love to do is tell you their story,
mm,
more than anything. And I love to hear them, as a novelist, I love to hear those stories. And I think a good crime novelist, a good crime writer, at the heart, the thing they got to have more than anything is empathy.
mm.
Uh, and that's something that I really like about crime writing is being able to just show, circumstances and show circumstances that people don't always understand. And that's been really a cool. I think both of my first two books that's what I'm trying to do with them.
Yeah, I appreciate that. In the author's note for Ozark Dogs, it's basically saying like the older I get, the more these choices, like, you know, drug dealing, violence, philandering on the wife or the husband, saying like the older I get, the more these choices seem relative. Is a lot of that related to the work you've done? And then I guess that just goes into like, you know, your note is like this book is fiction. Although none of these characters is real, they could be any one of us, I think is the way you end it. But you're talking about, I always felt like I could never do this, I could never cook meth, I could never cheat on my wife, I definitely wouldn't murder anyone. I wonder about these ideas of like the choices are relative. I mean, and you talked about waffling. Waffling is not the term because it has like a negative connotation, right? But like, I wonder where relativity comes in. You do talk about there are guardrails, so there's some objectivity, but just how does that work with relativity, and how does that work fit so well with crime, or I guess vice versa? How does crime make relativity, moral relativity, fit so well?
Well, the reason I think it works so well is because, a good crime novel will hook a reader from the start.
Mm,
And what I like about the new stuff I'm reading, or even somebody like Elmore Leonard, who I believe was ahead of his time, there are never just good guys and bad guys, and that goes all the way back to all great literature.
mm-hmm,
Um, and that's what I'm saying, that the older I get, I mean, there's the old saying, walk a mile in a man's shoes, or, that's an old saying for a reason. And the reason is because it's true. Like, I just have come to believe that nobody can say for sure what he or she will not do, unless they're in that situation. And
mm,
so what's so nice about crime writing is you can put your characters, you can put people in the absolute worst situations,
mm-hmm,
and you can turn the heat all the way up early. And then we just get to watch how they react. And
mm-hmm.
that's what makes it so fun. I don't outline, I don't plan ahead really much. I was telling you before we got going that I don't research. I don't like to research. So, what I like to do is create characters that feel real to me, and then put them in bad situations, and then see the humanity come out, the good, the bad, the oftentimes ugly. My dad, man, he's always like, son, when are you going to write a happy book? And I'm just like, which raises an even larger existential question, because I'm a pretty happy guy in my
Sure.
life. I enjoy my life. And I often look back at these books and think, damn, is this representative of my larger worldview? I don't know.
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Jeremiah's got some ghosts. So the book starts off with
And
a
he's the good
letter,
guy.
and he's the good guy, right? The book starts off with there are probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 throughout the book, letters from Joe. Joe, the girl, the senior in high school, 17, 18-year-old, writing a letter to inmate Jake, who we find out is her father, right? And this idea, and it definitely becomes a motif throughout the book, the idea of the camera always watching, which is in a literal sense, right? Is this so Joe lives with her grandpa Jeremiah, at the junkyard basically. Their house is right outside there, and there's there are always cameras, and the cameras get involved in the plot later on. And I'm really, really, really going to tiptoe around the plot spoilers because people need to read this book. There's so many. I told you before we started recording, I was like, a couple of things that surprised me or shocked me or was so cool. But like anyway, but yeah, so it starts off with that, and we get to know Jeremiah. He's got a freaking armory, right?
Yeah.
But it does say that his office has, quote, more books than weapons, right? Jeremiah decides to take Joe or Joanna's University of Arkansas admittance letter, and he crushes it up in the junkyard, right?
Yep.
He does know there'll probably be electronic ones to come later, but the idea of wanting to keep her home. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about Jeremiah and Joe and their relationship, and just how Jeremiah really has her sheltered, like, big time.
Yeah. So I don't think this is giving anything away, but Joanna and Jeremiah, like the reason they're together is because of tragedy. Um, Jeremiah is the only person left in her life to take care of her, and it's been that way since she was an infant.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I really wanted to explore with this book, being in a small town, if you're in a larger town, um, you know, murders happen every day. Sometimes like so many murders that you don't even know, like they don't even make the headlines.
Sure.
But if you're in a small town, like my hometown is about 20, 30,000, you know, when that stuff happens and it's, decades in between,
Mm.
the aftershocks of that last for generations.
Yeah.
And that was what I wanted. Because everybody knows everybody and everybody is aware of what happened and knows, everybody knows everybody's business, even if it's just small things like high school football or whatever. But when something that big goes down, um, you just people just never would get away from it. And so that's what I wanted Jeremiah. That's a big part of why he has kind of barricaded Joanna into this junkyard. He is her protector, but she's also struggling like any 17, 18-year-old teenage girl. She's starting to become a woman and she's well on her way to becoming a good woman and wants more freedom. And so that's kind of the early tension of the book is like she's getting ready to break out on her own. Jeremiah knows this, but what is it safe? Is it because she hasn't seen any of this stuff firsthand. And so that's where the book opens. And that's, Joanna doesn't think there's anything to worry about, not anymore, all that's in the past. But like Faulkner said,
Fastest prologue, no?
yeah, that's it.
Sorry. Tried to steal that one from you. Um, well, thank you for that. So, Jeremiah's got demons, man. He'd fought in Vietnam, and this idea that he'd been well decorated, but for what? I mean, it's like he was decorated for killing, right? And he particularly thinks of that one girl. I don't know if I'm making that up, that she was 9 years old. I don't know if you would know that exactly, but a young girl, right?
The girl with the birthmark tattoo, or the birthmark, the broken heart birthmark.
Exactly, right. And
Yeah.
and those flashbacks come back to him. And there's so much in this book that's so interesting. I mean, you explained it so well about, like, let's say there's 15 years between murders, and thank goodness for that. But it's like you said, there's going to be just ramifications, right? Big time. And
Mm-hmm.
just the way that you meld these stories together, these family stories together, is like, dang, just like a master. And just the way that they're melded together and then kind of slowly untangled, right?
Yeah.
Right. So early on in the book, so Joe goes to the homecoming, and she's, if Vegas has odds on who's going to win, she was favored to win, but she doesn't. Kind of the classic, like, the guy who's connected in the town, his daughter just kind of
Yeah.
mysteriously, um, the guy who, she kind of mysteriously wins, of course, right?
Yeah.
And there's that scene that is really very vivid for me, where she's like walking up the bleachers, and he is too, and it's like, oh god, like, I don't want to talk to anybody, I don't want to see anybody, like, what are they going to say to us? And just like ghosts and memories, and so much interconnectivity, right?
Yeah.
his drinking. Such a cool plot device that you have him. He always has like a little flask or whatever, right? Or the actual bottle, like right next to his heart,
Yeah.
along with like a million guns. Um, I wonder about his drinking and like kind of where it stopped and started.
Yeah, so yeah, he says, when he took over caring for Joanna, that he stopped drinking like cold turkey. Um, but he has this really great line where it's like he said it was never his intention to stop completely. It
Mm.
was always just a pause.
Yeah.
It was always going to be just this window in time where he was going to raise her with a steady hand. And then, when that time was up and she was gone, he knew, like in his mind, he was going to go right back to it. And, you know, lo and behold, Joanna, which I think this is on the back of the book, so we're not giving anything away. She is gone before he wants her to be gone,
Mm.
and that drinking starts again, and it plays back to what you were saying, with the ghosts and what he had done in Vietnam, and that bottle allows him to become that man again
Mm.
when he kind of needs to be, in
Mm.
order to get Joanna back.
Right. I don't know if I think of, again, you played at a higher level of sports, but I think of like some of these athletes, or you'll hear about on TV, like when they finally retire, after 15, 17, 25 years of like keeping their body the best, they're just like, woo, nice. They're just gonna go and drink and eat, you know what I mean? Because they're like,
Yeah,
I freaking earned it, and they did,
no,
Reminds,
no
reminds me of
doubt.
him with his. Sorry, I was just saying, it reminds me of him with his, 18 years off. Like, I'm gonna get back to it though.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh
Like,
no, I can't tell you how many like stud running backs and guys I played ball with,
uh-huh.
about like 15 years now, and we'll see each other at a reunion or something, boy, and they're pushing 300, and I'm like, damn, where's that guy? You ate that guy that I was playing ball with.
Right, right. Um, so, again, a small town intermingled, and their stories definitely have connecting points, like Mona McNabb, who's the sheriff now. And she's kind of like, I think she kind of more fancies herself as like a big sister, right? But she's almost like a
Yeah,
mother figure to Joe. How I'm trying to figure her age, and like how do you see her and Jeremiah? Like, they definitely can talk about anything. I mean, they have some very high intensity, conversations and encounters. But like, does he have any romantic feelings for her? Is it more like a younger daughter? Like, I don't, how does he see her? I think I see how she sees him.
yeah, there's definitely like some gigging going on, like, and mostly it comes from Mona. Mona she's the sheriff. She's fully aware of Joanna's past and Jeremiah's past. So she knows about the scars that both of them carry. Um, and so because of that, she, takes Joanna out to eat as Joanna's growing up. She kind of takes her under her wing. So that puts her and Jeremiah in close vicinity. And so no, I always kind of see it like she says something, like if she were from a different generation,
Mm,
Jeremiah maybe would have been somebody, but I always kind of see it more of like a father-daughter
yeah,
relationship, like something that there's love there, but it's a different kind of love.
yeah, definitely. Um, so we also meet the Ledford family. Now, is it pronounced Evale?
Eval, yeah.
Evale, right? And Dime is like his cousin.
Yep.
I don't think that's his Christian name, his given name, but right.
You never know,
You
man.
never
As a
know.
teacher, you know
Oh yeah.
that you never know.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You talk about like how you have fun making like eccentric characters and kind of not off the wall, that was not your words,